Imagine a place where the US government didn't just spy on its enemies, but tried to outsmart time itself. A hidden base. Strange experiments. Witnesses who swear they saw portals open in midair. And when it was over, the project vanished. The records disappeared. And everyone involved was told to forget it ever happened. But tonight, we're not forgetting. Because buried beneath an abandoned radar tower on Long Island lies one of the most disturbing conspiracy theories of the Cold War. This is the Montauk Project. The experiment some believe quietly reshaped American power, politics, and paranoia forever. And yes, it allegedly involved time travel. Because of course it did. Imagine standing at the far edge of Long Island. No tourists. No boardwalk. Just wind, rusted fences, and a massive concrete tower staring out into the Atlantic like it's still waiting for something. Now imagine being told this place once tried to bend reality itself. Not metaphorically. Not philosophically. But physically. What if the US government didn't just race the Soviets for nukes, but for control over time? Brief radio static, distorted voices. According to former insiders, somewhere beneath this abandoned Air Force base, scientists pushed the human mind beyond its limits. They claimed thoughts could become weapons. That memories could be rewritten. That the future could be visited. And when the experiment went wrong, they didn't shut it down quietly. They erased it. Dramatic music rises. Because this wasn't supposed to be remembered. Officially, Montauk Air Force Station was just a Cold War radar site. A boring name for a boring job. But unofficially, people who worked here say there were levels that didn't exist on blueprints. Rooms sealed behind steel doors. Experiments that didn't make sense, until decades later. One former security guard would later say, "There were nights when alarms went off, but nothing showed on radar. We were told not to ask questions. So we didn't." Music cuts, sudden silence. And that's the part that should worry us. Because when the government tells you not to ask questions, it's usually because the answers are worse than the rumors. So tonight, we're reopening the files. We're investigating a project that officially never existed, but allegedly changed everything. Mind control. Human experiments. And a machine some believe punched holes through time itself. This is the Montauk Project. And once you hear what was claimed to happen here, you'll never look at Cold War history the same way again. The Montauk Project. The forgotten conspiracy that changed US politics forever. Before Montauk became a conspiracy, it was something far more ordinary. A Cold War outpost. In the late 1950s, America was obsessed with one thing. What the Soviets were doing right now, and what they might do tomorrow. Missiles. Bombers. Nuclear subs. And if one of them came screaming across the Atlantic, the US needed to know before it was too late. So in 1958, the Air Force built Montauk Air Force Station on the very tip of Long Island, America's easternmost eye. Its centerpiece was a towering radar dish, scanning the sky day and night. Technically, it was part of the SAGE defense network, a massive early warning system designed to predict attacks before they happened. Predict. That word matters. Because prediction is just one step away from control. Low music pulse begins. By the early 1960s, Montauk wasn't just watching the sky. It was experimenting. Declassified military records show upgrades that didn't match its public mission. Power increases. Expanded underground facilities. New electromagnetic equipment. And yet, no corresponding threat increase. So what exactly were they preparing for? According to a partially redacted Air Force logistics report from 1967, Montauk was classified as a non-standard research support site. That phrase appears only a handful of times in Cold War documentation. Every time, It's connected to experimental programs. Dramatic pause. Former technicians later claimed the base had multiple subterranean levels, some accessible only with special clearance. One civilian contractor recalled. "We'd install equipment we didn't understand. Nobody explained what it did. We just made sure it didn't fail." Which, historically speaking, is how every disaster starts. Subtle hum grows louder. By the 1970s, the Cold War had changed. It wasn't just about weapons anymore. It was about information. Who could see first? Who could think faster? Who could influence outcomes before they happened? And that's when Montauk's role allegedly shifted, from defense, to experimentation. Because according to insiders, this base wasn't just looking outward. It was looking inward. At the human mind. Officially, Montauk was decommissioned in 1981, labeled obsolete. But documents show funding streams that didn't stop. They moved. Reclassified. Redistributed. Hidden. And if Montauk was truly irrelevant, why bury it in silence? Short beat. Because what happened next is where history ends, and the legend begins. Transition sound, radio static morphs into deep bass. This is where Montauk stops being a military base and starts becoming something else entirely. According to multiple former insiders, sometime in the early 1970s, the focus underground shifted. Not toward weapons. Not toward radar. But toward people. Because the Cold War wasn't just about who had bigger bombs anymore. It was about who could control perception. Who could influence thoughts. Memories. Decisions. And Montauk, allegedly, became a testing ground for that idea. Brief pause. Several witnesses describe a reinforced chamber deep beneath the base. No windows. Extra thick walls. Cables running like veins across the ceiling. At the center of the room, a chair. Not an electric chair. Though that comparison comes up a lot. This one was metal. Industrial. Surrounded by electromagnetic coils and amplifiers tuned to specific brainwave frequencies. They called it, very creatively, the chair. Low bass hit. According to one former technician, subjects were seated, restrained, and exposed to intense electromagnetic pulses. The goal? To amplify human thought. Not metaphorically. Literally. One alleged participant later claimed. They told us to imagine something simple. A shape. A sound. Something harmless. And at first, nothing happened. But then, according to multiple accounts, objects began to appear. Small ones. Unstable ones. As if imagination was bleeding into physical space. Electric surge sound. Now, skeptics will immediately point out. There's no proof this worked. And they're right. But what makes Montauk disturbing isn't the success. It's the consistency of the stories. Different witnesses. Different years. Same details. Same room. Same chair. Same fear. One former security guard recalled alarms triggering without any visible threat. No intruders. No aircraft. Just sudden spikes in electromagnetic readings. And then, screams. Music drops to near silence. According to insiders, the experiments escalated. They pushed subjects harder. Longer sessions. Higher power. And eventually, this is where things allegedly went very wrong. Something came back. Witnesses describe a moment when a subject lost control of their thoughts. Instead of imagining an object, they imagined a presence. And that presence manifested. Hostile. Unstable. Uncontainable. One report describes emergency shutdown procedures being activated as scientists fled the chamber. Another claims the entity vanished as suddenly as it appeared. No remains. No explanation. Just silence. Heartbeat sound fades in. And that's when Montauk crossed a line. Because if thought could become matter, what else could it become? And if the human mind could shape reality, who decided what was allowed to exist? Slow, ominous rise in music. What started as psychological research had turned into something far more dangerous. Something no one was prepared to control. And according to insiders, the worst experiments hadn't even begun yet. At some point, according to insiders, Montauk scientists realized something unsettling. The chair wasn't just amplifying thoughts. It was distorting reality around them. Witnesses described clocks malfunctioning during experiments. Watches running fast, then slow, then stopping altogether. One technician claimed the room felt thicker, as if air itself had weight. And that's when the theory changed. What if they weren't creating objects? What if they were pulling them from somewhere else? Several former personnel believe Montauk stumbled into something far more dangerous than mind control. They believe they cracked temporal displacement. Not clean time travel like in the movies. No DeLoreans, no glowing tunnels. Something messier. Unstable. Moments folding over each other. According to an alleged 1973 internal memo, never officially verified, another returned disoriented, unable to recognize his surroundings, insisting he had seen a city that hadn't been built yet. And before you dismiss that as fantasy, remember. This was the Cold War. Governments tested radiation on soldiers. Mind-altering drugs on civilians. Ethics were flexible. Music fades almost completely. Some insiders claim the experiments weren't about travel. They were about information. Seeing future outcomes. Testing probabilities. Learning which choices led to which results. And if that's true, Montauk wasn't about moving people through time. It was about peeking behind it. Slow inhale sound. But here's the problem. Reality doesn't like being observed that closely. Witnesses say the anomalies became stronger. Less predictable. One night, according to multiple accounts, alarms triggered across the base. Power surged far beyond safe limits. The distortion expanded. Scientists panicked. Security sealed corridors. And then, silence. Whatever was happening had exceeded containment. One anonymous source later claimed. That was the moment they realized. We don't control this. After that night, the tone changed. The experiments continued, but only briefly. Because Montauk had reached its limit. They weren't just risking lives anymore. They were risking cause and effect. And once you start breaking that, there's no rewind button. After the incident, whatever actually happened that night, Montauk changed. According to former personnel, the energy underground was different. Not curiosity. Not ambition. Fear. Experiments were scaled back. Access was restricted. Entire sections of the base were sealed off, sometimes overnight. One technician later recalled. Rooms we worked in every day were suddenly gone. Concrete poured. Doors welded shut. Like they were burying something, fast. Soft, uneasy music begins. And then, just as abruptly as it had intensified, Montauk ended. In 1981, the Air Force announced Montauk Air Force Station would be permanently shut down. The reason given? Obsolete technology. No mention of experiments. No mention of research. No mention of anything unusual at all. Which would be easier to accept if the paperwork matched the story. But it doesn't. Declassified budget documents show funding streams continued, rerouted into unnamed research programs with familiar language. Electromagnetic studies. Cognitive influence. Predictive modeling. Different names. Same fingerprints. Dramatic pause. Personnel were reassigned. Some transferred to other defense labs. Others disappeared from public records entirely. Several whistleblowers claimed they were warned never to speak about Montauk. Not threatened. Not bribed. Just quietly reminded that national security is a very flexible concept. And it worked. For years, almost no one talked. Music drops. The base itself was abandoned, left to rot on the shoreline. Locals reported strange things long after shutdown. Power surges in a supposedly dead facility. Lights flickering in sealed buildings. Electronic interference near the radar tower. Probably coincidence. Probably. But if Montauk was truly harmless, why fence it off? Why patrol it for years after closure? Why erase it instead of repurpose it? Slow, heavy beat. Some researchers believe Montauk wasn't destroyed. It was absorbed. Folded into other black budget programs. Because governments don't abandon breakthroughs. They bury them. Rename them. Move them somewhere quieter. And if Montauk taught officials anything, it's that some doors, once opened, can't be closed. Only hidden. Wind fades into silence. Which leaves us with an uncomfortable possibility. What if Montauk wasn't the end of the experiment, but the beginning? So now we're left standing here. At the edge of history. And the edge of belief. Because when it comes to the Montauk Project, there are only two possibilities. Either this was one of the most elaborate Cold War myths ever constructed. A story stitched together from secrecy, fear, and science fiction. Or something happened at Montauk that was never meant to be understood by the public. Something buried so deeply that even questioning it feels uncomfortable. Pause. Skeptics argue the Montauk legend grew out of real programs like MKUltra, exaggerated over time by unreliable witnesses and pop culture. And to be fair, history supports that skepticism. Human memory is flawed. Stories evolve. And governments aren't exactly known for clean paper trails. But here's the problem. Montauk isn't just one story. It's dozens. Independent witnesses. Similar details. Matching timelines. People who never met, describing the same rooms, the same equipment, the same fear. And that consistency is hard to ignore. Soft wind sound returns. When you visit the site today, Montauk Air Force Station feels off. The radar tower still stands. The building still casts shadows. But there's a silence there that doesn't feel empty. It feels deliberate. As if the place itself is waiting for history to remember it. And maybe that's the real legacy of Montauk. Not proof of time travel. Not mind control. But a reminder of how far governments are willing to go when fear outweighs ethics. How quickly defense becomes experimentation. How easily curiosity becomes hubris. Gentle rise in music. Did Montauk open a doorway in time? Did it influence politics, power, or perception in ways we'll never fully trace? Or did it simply expose something even more unsettling? That under the right conditions, humans will test anything. Even reality itself. Long pause. And if Montauk was possible then? What's possible now? Music slowly fades out. Stay curious. Stay skeptical. And remember. History doesn't always disappear. Sometimes, it just learns how to hide. Was it a rogue experiment that collapsed under its own ambition? A psychological operation that spiraled into myth? Or the first, and last, human attempt to break the rules of time? Did the Montauk Project quietly influence U.S. politics? Or did it simply reveal how desperate the Cold War made us? We may never know. But the questions remain. And the silence surrounding Montauk speaks louder than any answer. Because if even part of this story is true, what else was tested? What else was hidden? And what experiments are happening right now, just beyond the fence? Music slowly fades. Stay curious. And we'll see you in the next investigation.